Christmas Eve is usually reserved for champagne toasts and unwrapping gifts by the fire. But for Zayn Sterling, this year's gift wasn't a diamond necklace or a trip to the Maldives. It was a manila envelope tossed onto a mahogany desk. Her husband, Marcus, the CEO of Sterling Robotics, looked her in the eye and told her he was done. He thought he was discarding a boring housewife to run off with his young VP of marketing. But Marcus made a fatal calculation error. He didn't know that the mysterious angel investor keeping his failing company alive wasn't a faceless bank in Switzerland. It was the woman standing right in front of him, and she was about to call in her debt. The snow outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse in Tribeca fell in thick, silent sheets, blanketing New York City in white. Inside, the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. The air smelled of expensive pine needles and the lingering, metallic scent of betrayal. Zayn Sterling stood by the 12-foot Nordman fir, her hand resting lightly on a glass ornament. At 32, she possessed a quiet, understated elegance that often allowed her to blend into the background of her husband's flashy life. She was wearing a vintage silk dress, waiting for Marcus to pour the wine. "Zayn, we need to talk," Marcus said. His voice didn't have the warmth of the holidays. It had the sterile, clipped cadence he used in boardrooms when he was about to fire a junior executive. Marcus Sterling was handsome in the way politicians are, polished, sharp-jawed, and entirely superficial. He placed a glass of Pinot Noir on the marble coffee table, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick yellow envelope. He dropped it on the table next to the wine. The sound it made, a heavy, dull thud, echoed in the large room. "What is this?" Zayn asked, though a cold knot was already tightening in her stomach. "Divorce papers," Marcus said, checking his Rolex Submariner as if he had a train to catch. "I've had my lawyer, Arthur Kane, draw them up. They're generous, Zayn. More than the prenup required. You get the condo in Connecticut and a lump sum. I'm keeping the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, and obviously my shares in Sterling Robotics." Zayn didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply walked over to the table and looked down at the documents. "On Christmas Eve, Marcus? Really?" "There's never a good time, is there?" He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly gelled hair. "Look, let's be adults. We've grown apart. You're happy being a domestic partner. You like your books, your gardening, your quiet life. I need someone who matches my pace, someone who understands the pressure of running a billion-dollar tech unicorn." Zayn looked up, her eyes dark and unreadable. "You mean someone like Jessica Vane?" Marcus froze. His composure cracked for a split second. "How do you— I'm your wife, Marcus, not your employee. I notice things." Jessica Vane was the 26-year-old VP of marketing at Sterling Robotics. She was loud, ambitious, and had been seen clinging to Marcus's arm at the TechCrunch Disrupt Gala 3 months ago. "It's not just about Jessica," Marcus said defensively, regaining his footing. "It's about the company. Sterling Robotics is at a critical juncture. We're launching the SR90 prototype next month. I need total focus. I can't be dragged down by a marriage that's become stagnant." "Stagnant," Zayn repeated the word, tasting the bitterness of it. "I supported you when you started this company in a garage in Queens. I paid the rent for 3 years while you ideated. I edited your pitch decks." "And I'm grateful," Marcus said dismissively. "That's why the settlement is generous. But let's face it, Zayn. You don't understand my world anymore. You don't know what it's like to negotiate with sharks, to hold the fate of thousands of employees in your hands. You're soft." He walked to the coat rack and grabbed his cashmere overcoat. "I'm staying at the Four Seasons tonight. I expect you to be gone by the time I come back on the 26th. Sign the papers, Zayn. Don't make this ugly. You don't have the resources to fight me. He opened the heavy oak door. The cold wind from the hallway rushed in. Merry Christmas, Zayn. The door clicked shut. Zayn stood in the silence of the massive apartment. For a long minute, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she walked to the window and watched Marcus's black Mercedes Maybach pull away from the curb, undoubtedly heading to pick up Jessica. She turned back to the coffee table. She picked up the divorce papers, glanced at the terms, and then reached for her phone. She didn't call a divorce lawyer. She didn't call her mother. She opened a secure, encrypted app called Signal. She scrolled to a contact listed only as the board. She typed a single message: execute phase 0. The asset is compromised. She hit send. Zayn took a sip of the wine Marcus had poured. He was right about one thing. She didn't know what it was like to negotiate with sharks, because sharks didn't negotiate with the Leviathan. They got eaten. Marcus thought Zayn was a housewife, living off his allowance. He had no idea that Zayn Sterling was the legal name of the woman known in the venture capital underground as E.V. Blackwood. She was the silent founder of Blackwood Consortium, a shadow equity firm that owned controlling interests in biotech, green energy, and, most importantly, held the $40 million debt note that kept Sterling Robotics from bankruptcy. Marcus had just served divorce papers to the woman who owned his mortgage, his company, and his future. The day after Christmas, the lobby of the Sterling Robotics headquarters in downtown Manhattan was buzzing. But it wasn't the festive buzz of holiday cheer. It was the frantic energy of a crisis. Marcus Sterling strode through the glass revolving doors, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked impeccable in a navy Tom Ford suit, but his eyes were darting nervously. "What do you mean, frozen?" he hissed into the phone. "Talk to the CFO. It's a bank error." He hung up as Jessica Vane approached him. She was wearing a striking red dress that was perhaps a bit too bold for 9:02 a.m. on a Tuesday, but Jessica thrived on attention. "Marcus, baby," she said, linking her arm through his. "Did you do it? Is she gone?" "She's handling it," Marcus said, pulling his arm away slightly. He didn't want a public display just yet. "But listen, we have a problem. The liquidity transfer for the SR-90 launch didn't clear this morning. The vendor in Shenzhen is threatening to halt production." Jessica rolled her eyes. "It's probably just the holidays. Banks are slow. Come on. I ordered that espresso machine you like for your office. Let's celebrate. You're a free man." They walked into the elevator. Marcus tried to relax. Jessica was right. He was the CEO of the hottest robotics company in New York. He had just shed the dead weight of his marriage. 2026 was going to be his year. As the elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, his assistant, a nervous young man named David, was waiting. David looked pale. "Mr. Sterling," David stammered, "you have guests in the boardroom." "Guests? I didn't authorize any meetings. I'm clearing my schedule for the launch prep." They said they represent the senior creditor, sir. The Blackwood Consortium." Marcus stopped dead. The Blackwood Consortium. They were the mysterious entity that had saved Sterling Robotics 2 years ago, with a massive infusion of cash when the Series A funding dried up. Marcus had never met the head of Blackwood. All dealings went through a law firm in Zurich. He only knew them as a signature on a check and a frighteningly strict set of covenants in the loan agreement. "Blackwood?" Marcus straightened his tie. "Why are they here?" "They said there's been a breach of contract regarding the morality and stability clause," David whispered. Marcus felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back. "Get the legal team. Now." He turned to Jessica. "Go to your office. Stay there." "But I want to meet them," Jessica pouted. If I'm going to be the new face of this company alongside you, I should— Jessica, go! Marcus snapped. He walked toward the double-glass doors of the boardroom. He composed himself. He was Marcus Sterling. He could charm anyone. He pushed the doors open. 3 men in grey suits sat on one side of the long table. They looked like undertakers, but it was the person sitting at the head of the table, his chair, that made the air leave his lungs. The chair was turned away from him, facing the window view of the Hudson River. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice booming with forced confidence, "to what do I owe the pleasure? And who is sitting in my seat?" One of the grey suits, a man with wire-rimmed glasses, spoke up. "Mr. Sterling, I am Arthur Penhaligon, lead counsel for Blackwood Consortium. We are here because of a significant change in the leadership dynamic of Sterling Robotics." "There is no change," Marcus said, stepping forward. "I am still CEO." "The Blackwood Agreement clearly states," Penhaligon read from a file, "that any significant alteration to the CEO's personal assets or marital status that could endanger the stability of the company requires immediate disclosure and review by the primary investor." "My divorce is private," Marcus spat. "It has nothing to do with the company." "On the contrary," the lawyer said, "since your wife, Zayn Sterling, is listed as a guarantor on the original incorporation papers from 5 years ago, her removal from your life alters the risk profile." Marcus laughed nervously. "Zayn? She's a guarantor in name only. She doesn't know a balance sheet from a grocery list." The chair at the head of the table slowly swiveled around. Marcus expected to see an old European banker, perhaps an Asian tycoon. Instead, he saw a woman. She was wearing a sharp, white blazer that looked like armor. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun at home, was blown out in sleek, dangerous waves. She wore a pair of glasses he had never seen before, thick frames that made her look intellectual and severe. It was Zayn. But it wasn't the Zayn he had left crying, or so he thought, on Christmas Eve. This woman radiated power. She didn't look like a wife. She looked like a predator. "Hello, Marcus," Zayn said. Her voice was smooth, like velvet over gravel. Marcus blinked, his brain misfiring. "Zayn, what are you doing here? Did you follow me? Get out before I have security drag you out. You're embarrassing yourself." He looked at the lawyers. "I apologize. My soon-to-be ex-wife is having a breakdown. I'll have her removed." "Sit down, Marcus," Zayn said. She didn't shout. She just commanded. "Excuse me?" I said, "Sit down." She tapped a manicured fingernail on the mahogany table. "Mr. Penhaligon, please explain the corporate structure to Mr. Sterling. He seems to have forgotten who owns the debt." Penhaligon cleared his throat. "Mr. Sterling, the Blackwood Consortium is a holding company. It is 100% owned by a blind trust." "So?" Marcus demanded. "The sole beneficiary and trustee of that trust," Penhaligon continued, "is Mrs. Zayn Vance Sterling." The room went silent. The hum of the air conditioning sounded like a jet engine in Marcus's ears. That's impossible," Marcus stammered. "Zayn doesn't have money. Her parents were school teachers." "My parents were school teachers," Zayn said, standing up and walking slowly toward him. "But my grandmother was Agnes Vance. You know, Vance Mining. When she died 10 years ago, she left everything to me. I kept it quiet because I wanted a normal life. I wanted to see if a man would love me for me, not for the Vance fortune." She stopped inches from him. She smelled of the expensive perfume he thought she only wore on anniversaries. "I used my inheritance to fund Blackwood," she continued. "I funded you, Marcus. When no bank would touch your robotics idea, I approved the loan. I sat at this very table, hidden behind layers of lawyers, and signed the check that built this building. Marcus's face drained of color. He looked like a ghost. You own the debt? I own $40 million of it, Zayn corrected, and it's callable on demand if the CEO demonstrates gross negligence or moral turpitude. Filing for divorce to marry your subordinate while the company is in a liquidity crunch? I'd say that qualifies. The door to the boardroom burst open. Jessica Vane ran in, breathless. Marcus, security is downstairs. They're saying my pass doesn't work. They won't let me. Jessica stopped. She saw the lawyers. She saw Zayn. What is she doing here? Jessica sneered, looking at Zayn. Did she come to beg for alimony? Zayn turned to Jessica. The look she gave the younger woman wasn't one of jealousy. It was a look of pity. Jessica Vane, Zayn said, VP of Marketing, salary $180,000, performance review, mediocre, spending on corporate card, excessive. Who do you think you are? Jessica shrieked. Zayn turned back to the lawyers. Mr. Penhaligon, as the majority creditor, I am invoking Clause 14. I am assuming temporary executive control of Sterling Robotics to protect my investment. Understood, Ms. Blackwood. Penhaligon nodded. Zayn looked at Marcus, whose knees were shaking. Marcus, she said softly. You wanted a divorce? You've got one. But regarding the company, you're fired. She pointed to the door. And take your mistress with you. You have 10 minutes to clear your desk before I have security throw you both out into the snow. The silence in the boardroom of Sterling Robotics was absolute, save for the hum of the HVAC system and the distant, muffled sounds of the city 40 floors below. Marcus Sterling, a man who had graced the cover of Forbes's 30 Under 30 only 2 years prior, stood trembling. His knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the mahogany table, a table he no longer owned. You can't do this, Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. He looked from Zayn to the lawyers, his eyes pleading for some legal loophole to materialize out of thin air. I am the founder. The bylaws protect me. You can't just fire me because of a marital dispute. Arthur Penhaligon, the lawyer with the wire-rimmed glasses, adjusted his spectacles. Mr. Sterling, you signed the Series B lending agreement. Clause 44, subsection C. The primary investor reserves the right to remove executive leadership immediately upon evidence of financial mismanagement or reputational risk. Divorce proceedings initiated by the CEO against the company's primary guarantor, without prior disclosure, constitutes a massive reputational risk. The board has voted. It was unanimous. The board? Marcus looked around. I am the board. Not anymore, Zayn said, her voice cool and detached. She sat in the leather chair that had been custom-molded to Marcus's back, looking entirely at ease. I activated the conversion rights on my debt this morning at 8 a.m. I converted $40 million of debt into equity. I now own 61% of Sterling Robotics. I am the board, Marcus. Jessica Vane, who had been standing near the door in stunned silence, suddenly stepped forward. The shock was wearing off, replaced by the survival instinct of a social climber realizing the ladder was burning. Marcus, Jessica said, her voice high and tight. Do something. Tell her to stop. Zayn swiveled the chair to face Jessica. He can't tell me to do anything, Jessica, and neither can you. Now, I believe I gave you 10 minutes. Zayn pressed a button on the conference phone. Send in Mr. Henderson. The double doors opened, and Frank Henderson, the chief of security, walked in. Frank was a hulking man, an ex-Marine who had been with the company since the garage days. Marcus had always liked Frank. He felt Frank looked good, standing behind him in photos. Frank, Marcus said, relief washing over him. Thank God. Escort this woman, Mr. Sterling, Frank interrupted, his voice deep and apologetic. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked at Zayn. Ms. Blackwood, the boxes are ready. Marcus took a step back, bumping into the credenza. Frank, you work for me. Actually, sir, Frank said, finally meeting his eyes. My paycheck comes from the payroll account, and Ms. Blackwood froze that account an hour ago and transferred the funds to a new operating entity. I work for her now. We all do. Frank gestured to the door. Please, sir. Don't make me call the NYPD. It's better if you walk out with some dignity. The walk from the boardroom to the executive suite was the longest journey of Marcus's life. Every step felt heavy. He walked past the glass-walled offices of his senior staff. The CFO, the CTO, the head of sales, they were all at their desks, but none of them looked up. They were furiously typing, likely trying to save their own skins. They knew. In the corporate world, news of a coup travels faster than light. Marcus reached his office. On his desk, his beautiful imported Italian glass desk, sat 2 cardboard boxes. You have 5 minutes to take personal effects only, Frank said, standing in the doorway. No laptops, no hard drives, no company phones. Marcus stared at the box. He looked at the framed photo of him and Zayn from their wedding day, which he had kept on his shelf merely for appearances. He reached for it, then stopped. He didn't want it. He reached for his Lucite Entrepreneur of the Year award and threw it into the box. Jessica was in the hallway, sobbing into her phone. Daddy, I don't know. She just took over. She's crazy. You have to sue her. Marcus grabbed his coat. He didn't fill the box. There was nothing in this office that mattered anymore. The power was gone. The prestige was gone. Let's go, Marcus muttered to Jessica, grabbing her arm. Get off me, Jessica snapped, pulling away. She looked at him with undisguised disgust. You said you had ironclad control. You said she was a nobody. We'll fix this, Marcus hissed. Just get in the elevator. They walked to the elevator banks. As they waited, the employees in the open plan bullpen stopped working. 50 heads turned. There was no whispering, just a sea of eyes watching the king fall. Marcus stared straight ahead at the brushed steel doors, his face burning. The elevator ride down was silent. Jessica refused to look at him. She was frantically texting. When the doors opened to the lobby, Marcus braced himself for the cold winter air. But as he stepped out of the elevator, he was blinded by a wall of flashing lights. Flash, flash, flash! A dozen photographers and a camera crew from Bloomberg TV were camped out by the security turnstiles. Mr. Sterling, is it true you were ousted by your own wife? Jessica, do you have a comment on the allegations of embezzlement? Mr. Sterling, are you under investigation by the SEC? Marcus shielded his eyes. No comment! Get out of my way! He pushed through the mob, dragging a reluctant Jessica behind him. How? Marcus shouted over the din. How did they know? He looked back toward the elevators. Through the glass walls of the lobby, he could see the balcony of the mezzanine level. Standing there, looking down at the chaos like a queen watching a gladiator match, was Zayn. She held her phone to her ear. Up on the mezzanine, Zayn spoke quietly into her device. Yes, they're leaving the building now. The footage should be excellent. Make sure it trends by noon. Caption it. The Christmas Eve divorce that backfired. She hung up and watched Marcus shove a cameraman aside to get into a cab. Zayn felt a vibration in her hand. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. She had spent 2 years building the Blackwood persona, hiding her inheritance, structuring the loans through shell companies, just waiting for the day Marcus would try to cross her. She had hoped she would never have to use the nuclear option. She had hoped he would come to his senses, realize he had a good marriage, and grow up. But he hadn't. He had served her papers on Christmas Eve. "Are you okay, Ms. Sterling? I mean, Ms. Blackwood?" Zayn turned. It was David, Marcus's young assistant. He looked terrified. "I'm fine, David," Zayn said, smoothing her blazer. "And call me Zayn. Gather the department heads in the boardroom in 20 minutes. We have a company to save." "Yes, Zayn." David hesitated. Is the company going under?" "Not today," Zayn said, looking back at the empty spot where Marcus's car had been. "Today we're just taking out the trash." The Four Seasons Hotel in Midtown Manhattan was luxury personified, but to Marcus Sterling, the suite felt like a prison cell. It was 3 days after the Blackwood coup, as the Wall Street Journal had dubbed it. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, wearing a bathrobe that had seen better days. The room was littered with room service trays, half-eaten burgers, empty coffee pots, and a bottle of whiskey. On the massive flat-screen TV, a financial news pundit was dissecting his career. "It's a classic case of hubris, Jim," the analyst was saying. Sterling Robotics was burning cash at an alarming rate, but Marcus Sterling was busy buying Hampton's estates and allegedly financing a lavish lifestyle for his mistress. Zayn Sterling, or Evie Blackwood as the street now knows her, didn't just pull a power move, she performed a mercy killing on his career. Marcus threw the remote at the TV. It cracked the screen, but didn't shut it off. "Damn it!" he screamed. The bathroom door opened. Jessica walked out. She was dressed, her makeup perfect, pulling a Louis Vuitton suitcase. "Where are you going?" Marcus asked, eyeing the suitcase. "I'm going to stay with my parents in Greenwich," Jessica said. She didn't look at him. She was checking her reflection in the mirror. "Greenwich? We have a strategy meeting with the crisis PR firm in an hour." Jessica scoffed. "We?" "There is no we, Marcus. My lawyer advised me to distance myself from you." "Your lawyer?" Marcus stood up, swaying slightly. "I'm paying for your lawyer." "Not anymore," Jessica said coldly. "Your credit cards were declined this morning, Marcus. All of them. Even the Amex Centurion." She walked to the door. "Jessica, wait," Marcus pleaded, his voice desperate. "I love you. We can fix this. I'm going to sue Zayn. I'll get the company back. I just need time." Jessica turned, her hand on the doorknob. Her eyes were empty of anything resembling affection. "You don't get it, do you? You were the golden boy. That's why I was with you. Now? You're a joke, a meme. I have 50,000 new followers on TikTok who are laughing at us, not with us. I can't build a personal brand on a sinking ship." You mercenary little—" "Merry Christmas, Marcus," she said, echoing his words to Zayn. She slammed the door. Marcus stood alone in the silence. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. He had lost his wife, his company, his mistress, his reputation, and now, apparently, his money. He needed a shark, a real one. 2 hours later, Marcus sat in a leather chair in a smoky, dimly lit office in Lower Manhattan. This wasn't a white shoe law firm with glass walls. This was the office of Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne was a legend in New York for all the wrong reasons. He was the lawyer you called when you were guilty and wanted to destroy the opposition so badly they forgot to prosecute you. He was 60, bald, with eyes that looked like black beads. "So," Thorne said, lighting a cigar, "your wife outsmarted you. That's rare. Usually the husbands are the ones hiding the assets." "She tricked me," Marcus said, leaning forward. "She committed fraud. She signed that loan agreement as Evie Blackwood. She never disclosed she was the lender. That's a conflict of interest. That has to be illegal." Thorne blew a ring of smoke. "It's grey. Very grey. But she disclosed it to the SEC. under a blind trust. Technically, she didn't have to tell you anything. You signed the papers, Marcus. You didn't do your due diligence on your own lender because you were too desperate for the cash. So you're saying I'm screwed? I'm saying you have an uphill battle, Thorne said. But she has a weakness. What weakness? The company. Thorne smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. Sterling Robotics is fragile. She's trying to stabilize it. If we can prove that her takeover caused material damage to the shareholders, meaning the other minority investors, we can file an injunction. We can freeze her out. We can make it so painful for her that she pays you a settlement just to go away. How much? Marcus asked. 50 million, Thorne said. But I want 30%. Done, Marcus said without hesitation. One problem, Thorne said, opening a file folder. I did a little digging before you arrived. There's a rumor. What rumor? That the SR-90 prototype doesn't work. Thorne stared at Marcus. Marcus shifted in his seat. It works. It just has glitches. Glitches like it falls over, or glitches like it explodes. It's a software issue, Marcus said defensively. We just need more time. Marcus, Thorne lowered his voice. Did you lie to the investors about the functionality of the SR-90 to secure that last round of funding? The funding your wife provided? Marcus looked away. I exaggerated the readiness levels. Everyone does it in tech. Thorne chuckled darkly. If she finds out the prototype is a dud, she won't just fire you. She'll have you arrested for securities fraud. You didn't just cheat on your wife, son. You defrauded your biggest investor, who happens to be your wife. Meanwhile, at Sterling Robotics, Zayn was discovering exactly that. She was sitting in Marcus's office, now sanitized and reorganized. The desk was covered in schematics. Opposite her sat Dr. Aris Thorne, no relation to Julian, the lead engineer. Aris was a brilliant woman who had been marginalized by Marcus because she refused to flirt with him. Show me, Zayn said. Aris typed a command into a laptop. On the large monitor on the wall, a video feed from the testing lab appeared. The SR-90, a humanoid robot designed for warehouse logistics, stood in the center of the room. Execute lift protocol, Aris said into her headset. The robot moved forward. Its movements were jerky. It reached for a 50 lb crate. It lifted it. Then, its left knee joint buckled. The robot collapsed, the crate smashing on top of it. Sparks flew. Zayn closed her eyes and pinched the bridge of her nose. How long has it been doing this? 6 months, Aris said quietly. We told Marcus. We told him the hydraulic actuators weren't strong enough. We needed to source better parts from Germany. But Marcus said they were too expensive. He made us source cheap knockoffs from a supplier in Vietnam to cut costs and boost the quarterly margins. Let me guess, Zayn said, a sinking feeling in her gut. The supplier in Vietnam is owned by a shell company? Aris nodded. We think so. The invoices were irregular. Zayn slammed her hand on the desk. He was skimming. He was buying junk parts, showing high margins to the board, and pocketing the difference. She stood up and walked to the window. The snow was falling again. She had thought this was just about a broken heart. She thought she was teaching a cheating husband a lesson. But now she realized she had bought a lemon. She had invested her grandmother's fortune into a fraud. If this got out, Sterling Robotics would be worth zero. Her $40 million would be gone. The 200 employees in the building would be jobless. Can we fix it? Zayn asked, turning back to Aris. With the German parts? Yes. But it will take 3 months and another $5 million. We don't have that kind of cash. The accounts are drained. Zayn looked at the city lights. She was at a crossroads. Option A. Turn Marcus in. Go to the FBI. He goes to jail for years. But the scandal kills the company, and she loses everything. Option B, cover it up. Fix the robot. Find the money somewhere. Save the company, save the employees. But let Marcus walk free for now, because she can't risk a trial exposing the fraud. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Oak Room. 8 p.m. We have a proposition regarding your husband's equity. Julian Thorne, escort. Zayn stared at the screen. Marcus had lawyered up. She looked at Aris. Get the German parts. Order them. But the money? Aris asked. Zayn picked up her coat. Her eyes were cold, harder than they had been on Christmas Eve. I'm going to get the money, Zayn said. I'm going to sell the one thing Marcus loves more than himself. What's that? His legacy. Zayn walked out of the office. She wasn't going to the FBI, not yet. She was going to dinner with the devil, and she planned to make him pick up the check. The Oak Room was the kind of establishment where deals were made over Wagyu beef and 20-year-old scotch. It was dark, wood-panelled, and smelled of old money. Zayn walked in at exactly 8 p.m. She wore a black dress that was simple but cut like a weapon. She carried a single, thin leather folder. In the back booth, Julian Thorne sat like a gargoyle, nursing a whiskey. Marcus sat next to him, looking jittery. He had shaved, but his eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a man holding onto a cliff edge by his fingernails. Zayn, Marcus said, half rising. Sit, Zayn said, sliding into the booth opposite them. She didn't order a drink. She placed the folder on the table. Mrs. Sterling, Julian Thorne purred, his voice like oil. Or should I call you Ms. Blackwood? I must say, impressive corporate maneuvering, but illegal. Spare me the opening statement, Julian, Zayn said coolly. I'm here because you threatened an injunction. We didn't threaten, Thorne smiled. We promised. Unless you agree to a settlement, Marcus wants his 39% equity back, plus a $10 million severance package. In exchange, we won't file a lawsuit alleging that your hostile takeover damaged the company's valuation. Zayn laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Damaged the valuation? Marcus did that all by himself. Allegedly, Thorne said. But a court case takes years. Sterling Robotics needs cash now for the SR-90 launch. You can't afford a legal battle. You'll go bankrupt before the first court date. Pay him, and we go away. Marcus gained a little confidence. It's a good deal, Zayn. You get the company, I get my payout. We both move on. Zayn looked at her husband. You really think you're in a position to negotiate? I know I am, Marcus sneered. You're bluffing. You're cash poor. I know the accounts are empty. Zayn opened the leather folder. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the table. It wasn't a legal document. It was a shipping manifest. Do you recognize this, Marcus? Marcus squinted at the paper. His face went pale. No. It's a bill of lading from Dragonfly Components in Ho Chi Minh City, Zayn said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. It lists the hydraulic actuators you ordered for the SR-90, the ones you paid $200 per unit for, while billing the company $800 per unit through a shell company in the Cayman Islands called MS Holdings. Thorne stopped swirling his whiskey. He looked at the paper, then at Marcus. Marcus? Is this true? It's a misunderstanding, Marcus stammered. Standard markup. Consulting fees. It's embezzlement, Zayn corrected. And it's fraud. You installed defective parts into a robot meant to work alongside humans. If that robot hurt someone, you wouldn't just be sued. You'd be looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison for criminal negligence and wire fraud. Zayn turned to Thorne. Julian, I assume you don't want to represent a client who paid your retainer with stolen corporate funds? The DOJ frowns on that. They might freeze your accounts too, just to be thorough. Thorne's face hardened. He was a shark, and he smelled blood. His own clients. He slowly moved his hand away from Marcus's arm. You didn't tell me about the shell company, Marcus, Thorne said, his voice deadly quiet. I can explain, Marcus cried. Here is the counteroffer, Zayn said, sliding a second document across the table. Marcus signs over his remaining equity, all of it, to the Blackwood Trust. He resigns from the board permanently. He forfeits his severance. And what do I get? Marcus asked, his voice trembling. You get to stay out of jail, Zayn said. I won't report the fraud to the SEC. I'll classify the Vietnam deal as a barred vendor choice and absorb the loss. You walk away with nothing, but you walk away free. Marcus looked at the document. He looked at Thorne for help. Thorne finished his drink and stood up. I think you should sign, Marcus, and don't bother walking me out. I'm done here. Thorne left. Marcus was alone with his wife. You ruined me, Marcus whispered. No, Marcus, Zayn said, capping her pen. You ruined us. I'm just balancing the books. She pushed the pen toward him. With a shaking hand, Marcus Sterling signed away the last of his empire. The victory at the Oak Room tasted like ash. Zayn had 100% of the company, and she had silence, but she didn't have the $5 million needed to replace the defective actuators with the German ones. It was January 15th. The Global Tech Expo was in 3 weeks. If they didn't launch the SR90 there, the company would miss the market cycle and die a slow death. Zayn stood in the center of the warehouse floor. The engineering team, led by Dr. Aris Thorne, looked exhausted. They had stripped the robots down to their skeletons. We have the design, Aris said, wiping grease from her forehead. We have the team. We just don't have the parts. The German supplier, Kraus and Muller, won't ship without a 50% deposit. We need $2.5 million by Friday. Zayn nodded. You'll have it. How? Aris asked. The banks won't touch us while the divorce is in the news. I'm having a garage sale, Zayn said. The next day, the driveway of the Hamptons estate, the one Marcus had fought so hard to keep in the prenup discussions, was filled with luxury cars. But they weren't guests. They were buyers. Zayn had contacted a private auctioneer. She was liquidating everything Marcus had left behind, leveraging her power as the primary creditor, seizing collateral for the embezzled funds. The Maybach, sold for $180,000. The Patek Philippe watch collection, $400,000. The art collection, mostly modern pieces Marcus bought for clout but didn't understand. $1.2 million, it wasn't enough. She was still short by nearly $1 million. Zayn walked through the empty master bedroom of the Hamptons' house. It was cold. She opened the closet. Hanging there was her wedding dress. She touched the silk. Her phone rang. It was a private number. Hello? I heard you're selling the furniture. Marcus's voice came through. He sounded drunk. Are you enjoying it? Picking the bones? I'm saving the company, Marcus. Something you never did. You're going to fail, Marcus slurred. You think you can run a tech company? You're a librarian, Zayn. You're a nobody without me. The SR90 is my vision. It won't work without me. It didn't work with you, Zayn snapped. It fell over. Because you didn't let me finish, Marcus shouted. Listen to me. You're going to crash and burn at the expo, and I'm going to be there to watch. I bought a ticket. Front row. He hung up. Zayn stared at the phone. A shiver of unease went down her spine. Marcus was petty, but he was also desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. She needed that last $1 million. She walked out to the driveway where the auctioneer was packing up. "Is that everything, Mrs. Sterling?" the auctioneer asked. "No," Zayn said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a 10-carat yellow diamond ring, the engagement ring Marcus had given her, bought, she now knew, with the first round of Blackwood funding. "Sell this," she said. "This is very valuable," the auctioneer said, eyeing the stone. "Are you sure?" "It's just carbon," Zayn said. "Turn it into hydraulic actuators." 3 weeks later, the Javits Center in New York City, the Global Tech Expo. The hall was packed. Competitors from Tesla, Boston Dynamics, and Honda were there. But the buzz was all about Sterling Robotics. The story of the wife CEO had gone viral. People loved a comeback story or a train wreck. They were there to see which one it would be. Backstage, the atmosphere was frantic. "System check complete," Aris said, typing furiously on a tablet. "Hydraulics are green. The German parts are holding. Battery at 98%. Zayn stood by the curtain, watching the monitor. She wore a white suit, looking every bit the CEO. But her hands were sweating. "Where is the demo unit?" Zayn asked. "It's on the rising platform," Aris said. "Ready for your cue." Zayn peered through the curtain. In the front row, just as he threatened, sat Marcus. He was wearing a cheap suit, looking disheveled, sitting next to Jessica Vane? No, Jessica had abandoned him. He was alone. But he was smiling, a nasty, confident smile. Why was he smiling? "Aris," Zayn said urgently, "did anyone touch the code, the operating system?" "No," Aris said. "We locked it down. Biometric access only. You and me." Zayn watched Marcus. He pulled a small device from his pocket. It looked like a garage door opener, but thicker. A flipper zero, a hacking tool. "He's going to jam the signal," Zayn realized. "He's going to disrupt the Bluetooth connection between the controller and the robot." "If he does that," Aris went pale, "the robot will default to search mode. It might wander off the stage. It will look like a glitch. A disaster. Can we hardwire it?" "Not in 2 minutes. You're on in 60 seconds. Zayn looked at the stage, then at Marcus. She couldn't stop him physically without causing a scene. She had to outsmart him. "Aris," Zayn said, her voice steady. "Change the protocol. Switch the robot to autonomous voice command. Cut the remote controller entirely." "That's risky," Aris warned. "It's beta. If it misinterprets a command, do it. Cut the Bluetooth. Let him jam a dead signal." "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer boomed, "please welcome the CEO of Sterling Robotics, Zayn Sterling." Zayn took a deep breath. She walked out onto the stage. The lights were blinding. The applause was polite, but skeptical. She walked to the center of the stage. She saw Marcus in the front row. He raised his device, hiding it under his jacket. He pressed the button. Zayn smiled at him. She tapped her microphone. "Welcome," she said. "For years, robotics has been about control. Remote control. But true evolution is about independence." She turned to the rising platform. The SR-90 rose up. It was sleek, silver, and redesigned. Marcus was frantically pressing the button in his pocket. Nothing was happening. The robot stood perfectly still. "SR-90, Zayn said clearly. "Wake up." The robot's eyes glowed blue. It didn't wait for a signal from a tablet. It turned its head, scanned the crowd, and locked eyes with Zayn. "Hello, Zayn," the robot's synthesized voice said. The crowd gasped. "SR-90, Zayn commanded. "Identify the threat in the front row." The robot turned. It pointed a metal finger directly at Marcus. Marcus froze. The spotlight swung to him. "Subject identified," the robot said. "Heart rate elevated. Galvanic skin response indicates deception." Laughter rippled through the crowd. They thought it was a skit, a prepared bit. Zayn walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at Marcus. "We have purged the old bugs," Zayn said into the mic, staring right at him. "We have removed the faulty components, and now we are ready to build the future." She turned back to the robot. "Demonstrate precision." The robot picked up a needle and a thread. With fluid, human-like grace, powered by the expensive German hydraulics, it threaded the needle in one smooth motion. The crowd erupted, a standing ovation. Marcus sat frozen, his jamming device useless in his hand. He realized with dawning horror that by cutting the remote, she had rendered his sabotage irrelevant. He was just a spectator now. Zayn looked out at the cheering crowd. She had won. But as she waved, she saw two men in windbreakers waiting in the wings. They weren't security. They had FBI printed on their jackets. They weren't looking at her. They were looking at the man in the front row who had just been publicly identified as deceptive. Zayn's audit regarding the Vietnam invoices hadn't been entirely internal. She had sent one copy to the authorities that morning. The show was over, but the justice was just beginning. The applause in the Javits Center was deafening, a roaring wave of validation that washed over Zayn. She stood center stage, bathed in the spotlight, her hand resting on the cool metal shoulder of the SR-90. It wasn't just a machine anymore, it was her vindication, but the real drama was unfolding in the shadows of the front row. As the house lights came up, Marcus Sterling stood up abruptly. His face was a mask of shock and fury. He shoved the Flipper Zero device deep into his pocket, turning to flee before anyone recognized him as the man the robot had identified as a threat. He didn't make it to the aisle. Marcus Sterling. Two men in navy windbreakers blocked his path. Behind them stood a uniformed NYPD officer. Marcus froze. "Yes, I'm in a hurry." "Special Agent Miller, FBI, Financial Crimes Division," the taller man said, flashing a badge. "We have a warrant for your arrest." The crowd nearby quieted down, heads turning. People pulled out their phones. The wife CEO story was about to get its viral sequel. "Arrest?" Marcus laughed nervously, his eyes darting around. "This is a mistake. I'm the founder of this company." "We're aware," Agent Miller said, pulling out handcuffs. "We're arresting you for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering regarding the MS Holdings accounts in the Caymans. We also have a statement from your former attorney, Julian Thorne, regarding the falsification of investor documents." Zayn watched from the stage. She hadn't moved. She saw the color drain from Marcus's face. "Julian?" Marcus whispered. He ratted me out." "Mr. Thorne is cooperating with the investigation to avoid disbarment," the agent said. "Turn around, please." "Zayn!" Marcus screamed. He looked up at the stage, desperation wild in his eyes. "Zayn, tell them! Tell them we had a deal! You said you wouldn't report it!" Zayn took the microphone from the stand. The room went silent. The cameras zoomed in. "We did have a deal, Marcus," Zayn said, her voice amplified through the massive hall. "You signed away the company, and I agreed not to report the fraud if you walked away. If you let me save the company you tried to destroy." She walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at him like a judge from on high. "But you didn't walk away," she continued. "You came here today with a jamming device. You tried to sabotage the launch. You tried to destroy the livelihoods of 200 employees just to soothe your ego. You broke the terms of our truce." She signaled to the agents. "He's all yours." Marcus struggled as the cuffs clicked shut. "You planned this. You planned all of it." "I didn't plan for you to be a criminal, Marcus," Zayn said softly, though everyone heard her. "I just planned for you to be yourself." As they dragged him out, flashing cameras captured the image that would splash across every tabloid the next morning. The former golden boy of tech, humiliated and handcuffed, while his ex-wife stood above him, the queen of the industry he thought he ruled. One year later, Christmas Eve. The penthouse in Tribeca looked different. The cold, modern Italian furniture Marcus had favored was gone, replaced by warm velvets, bookshelves filled with actual books, and art that Zayn actually liked. The Nordman fir was there, tall and smelling of pine, decorated with ornaments Zayn had made as a child, the ones Marcus had banned because they looked cheap. The doorbell rang. Zayn walked to the door. She wore a comfortable cashmere sweater, not a silk dress meant for display. She opened it to reveal Dr. Aris Thorne. "Merry Christmas, boss," Oris said, holding a bottle of champagne. "Merry Christmas, Aris, and stop calling me boss. You're the CTO. You basically run the place." Aris laughed, stepping inside. "Old habits. Besides, Forbes just named you Businesswoman of the Year. You are the boss." They walked into the living room. The TV was on in the background with the volume low. A news segment was playing. Former tech mogul Marcus Sterling was sentenced today to 8 years in federal prison, the reporter said. Sterling, who pleaded guilty to defrauding investors, issued no statement. His former mistress and co-conspirator, Jessica Zayn, received probation for her testimony. Zayn picked up the remote and turned the TV off. "Do you miss him?" Aris asked, pouring the champagne. Zayn looked at the blank screen. She thought about the man who had handed her divorce papers exactly 1 year ago in this very room. She thought about the cruelty, the dismissal, the way he had made her feel small for a decade. Then she thought about the last year. The late nights in the lab, the thrill of the expo, the loyalty of her team, the feeling of waking up every morning knowing she was the master of her own fate. "I miss who I thought he was," Zayn said, taking the glass. "But I like who I am now a lot better." She walked to the window. The snow was falling again, just like that night. But this time, the city didn't look cold. It looked bright, alive, and full of possibility. She raised her glass to the reflection in the window. Not E.V. Blackwood, the shadow investor, but Zayn Sterling, the woman who survived. "To the future," Zayn said. "To the future," Aris echoed. Outside, the snow continued to fall, burying the past, leaving a clean, white slate for whatever came next. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the Christmas buyout. Talk about karma, right? Marcus thought he was discarding a boring housewife, but he ended up handing the keys to his kingdom to the one person who actually knew how to rule it. It's a powerful reminder that you should never underestimate the quiet ones in the room, and you should definitely check who owns your debt before you file for divorce. I want to know what you think. Do you think Zayn was too harsh by calling the FBI at the end? Or did Marcus get exactly what he deserved for trying to sabotage the robot? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of corporate revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We drop new dramas every week. Thanks for listening, and have a Merry Christmas. Just make sure you check your paperwork before you open your gifts. See you in the next video.